Hey Geneseo, it's baseball season and we've got a brand new show for you. Sit tight, Hidden Histories. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hidden Histories. I'm Dalkin D. Moranville, and I'm sitting here with a buddy of mine. His name is Steve Kastorf, and today we're talking baseball, and he's a hometown boy, and his name is Baby Doll Jacobson. Steve, welcome to Hidden Histories.
Good.
And you're wearing your Brewers jersey.
Yeah. We're born in Wisconsin. You got to be a Brew Crew fan. So, yeah, going to baseball season, we have a great start to the season coming up, and hopefully a good season. Hopefully they don't go on strike or anything like that, because that takes away from the season. But as we look back and we look at our hidden histories, one of them is we've had some baseball history here in Geneseo. We've had and Henry County. We've had the Union Giants come in, who were a colored baseball team out of Chicago, and they would play our Geneseo White Sox, which was a semi-pro team around the turn of the century here. We had the Chicago White Sox came to Galva and played an exhibition game, and what was unique about that was they played at the end of the season instead of the start of the season. They came in September and played this exhibition game. Over 3,000 people showed up in Galva for that game. It is really a cool story.
So they came from Chicago. Where were they able to play
in Galva? I don't know which diamond they played on. I haven't been able to find that out, but they did play in Galva, and they back then it was take the train down, get off the train, play the game, get on the train, go back to Chicago, but that's what they did. That's how the players got more money, because they weren't making the salaries they make today, but they still were making more money than people that were working in industry or on the farms and so on. Speaking of the farms, our first person that we're going to look at was, like you said, a Geneseo boy. He was born in Cable, Illinois, which is just outside of Sherrard. And when he was at elementary school age, his parents moved to a farm outside of Geneseo, just west of Geneseo, and that's where he grew up. He went to rural schools here, and then he ended up going to Geneseo High School. And this, we're talking 1909, 1908. He was in Geneseo High School for 3 years. Didn't graduate because back then, boys were always required to work on the farm. If they were farm boys, Dad would bring them back to the farm. So a lot of boys didn't graduate from high school.
So when you say rural schools, he went to schoolhouses because that's what they would have gone to at that time.
Yep.
And when he went to Geneseo High School, at that time it would have been, I think, wouldn't it have been the South School at that time?
Yes, it would have been South School.
The high school across from the city park wouldn't have been constructed.
No, it was not ready to go yet.
Okay.
So he went, and he, like I said, went 3 years, and his dad took him out. So he didn't graduate from Geneseo. And then in 1909, he decided, I enjoy playing baseball, because he was playing on the local diamonds here. And the local team, minor league team at the time, was the Rock Island Islanders. And they were a big deal because they played in what was called the 3I League, Illinois, Iowa, and Indiana. The teams were from those areas, and that's who they was minor league. It wasn't like the minor leagues today where they were farm teams. These were individual teams that played locally because they had to play where the trains went, because they didn't have buses and so on to get there, or chartered planes. They went on the trains, and so they played kind of local. There was a team in Davenport, the team in Rock Island, one up in Cedar Rapids, and then around the area that way. Dubuque had one, and so on. So he got recruited to go play in 1909 for the Islanders. The Islanders started playing in 1901. So there was a relatively new, as baseball goes, a relatively new team in baseball realms. And he went down there, and he was a catcher because he was big. He was 6'3", about 200 pounds. So he was a big boy. And he was a farm boy, so he was strong. So they were using him as a catcher. And he started out catching, and his first game, he went up and hit a double. So they knew they had somebody that they wanted. Then as the year went on, as he got into July, he was still playing for him. because most of the kids that came out of Henry County, they would go and play what was called a trial. They would get 3, 4, 5 games, and then they would move on, or they would be kept. Well, he kept them. The team kept William Jacobson, and he played for them 43 games that year. And in July, they moved him to the outfield because their outfielder got hurt. And back then, they didn't have big teams. They would keep 10, 11, 12 players. That's it. Because the pitchers pitched every day. And
there was no 5-man rotation.
No,
4-man rotation.
There was no relief pitchers either. Usually, you started a game, you finished the game. So they moved him to the outfield, and they were playing down in Peoria at that time, and he ended up hitting a triple and a double in that game. And Rock Island, for whatever reason, moved him on to Battle Creek, Michigan. Well, he went up to Battle Creek, Michigan, and they wanted him as a catcher. So they were using him as a catcher. He played there for a while, and then money reasons and other reasons, they cut him. They let him go. So he came back to Rock Island, and he played in Rock Island for a couple years. He then was drafted by, they called it a draft, but it was more like recruiting. He was drafted by the New York Giants. And I'm not talking the football team, I'm talking, they were the baseball team then.
And they were still in New York.
They were in New York, yep. They played at the Polo Grounds. And he went there and went to their spring training in 1911 and didn't make the team. So he came back to Rock Island again and played in Rock Island. But then the Detroit Tigers caught wind of him, and they drafted him. And a draft back then was the major league team would pay the minor league team for the player. So for $1,000, they paid Rock Island $1,000, and he went to Detroit.
And that was to buy
the player.
Because it wasn't like it is now where you buy the player's contract.
Right,
you buy
the player, and you own him. The player didn't have any rights. They had no rights. They were stuck with the team they went to. So he went to Detroit. The only problem was he was playing the outfield. And they drafted him as an outfielder because that's what he was playing now full time. And their outfield, if you know anything about the 1910s, 1910 through 1920s, the Detroit Tigers had a very good outfielder by the name of Ty Cobb.
Yeah, he wasn't going anywhere behind Ty Cobb.
And he had 2 other good outfielders. A guy was named Crawford, who was a teammate of Cobb's, of course, and their left fielder, and I can't remember his name right offhand, but they had real good outfielders. So they kept him on the team, though, because they knew they needed his bat, because he was batting well in the minor leagues. Well, he got to the major leagues, and as so many players even today have a problem with, he couldn't hit the curveball. He just could not hit the curveball. It always reminds me when I was reading the papers about it, and I found the stories, and they said he couldn't hit the curveball. It made me think of Major League, the movie, when the big hitter for the Indians then couldn't hit the curveball, and he just couldn't hit the curveball. Well, that's what was Jacobson's problem.
He needed Joe Boo.
Yeah, he needed Joe Boo, exactly. Yep, he needed Joe Boo. So the Tigers then decided, we don't want him to go anywhere else. So they sent him to the minor leagues. And his minor league debut was in the South. He went down to the Southern League, what was classified. And there were teams from Nashville, Birmingham, Little Rock, Shreveport, all these towns down in the South where baseball was still king. And he went down there and played for Chattanooga, and he did fairly well down there. And the Tigers then brought him back up to try again, and they decided, no, can't do it. So they traded him because just like today, the Tigers needed more pitching. They were in the league hunt for the title. They needed more pitching. They had an extra outfielder, so they traded him to the St. Louis Browns, not the Cardinals. Back then, the St. Louis had 2 teams. They had the Cardinals and they had the Browns. One in the American League, one in the National League. Cardinals were in the National League. The Browns were in the American League. He got to the Browns, and he started playing for the Browns and had a so-so year, but once again, couldn't hit the curveball. So they sent him back down to the minor leagues, and he tore it up in the minor leagues. Had a super season. in the minor leagues. Actually won the most valuable player for the Southern League. So the Browns decided, yeah, we need to get him back. So the next year, 1915, he came back up, and they decided, he can do it. So he worked hard on hitting the curveball and hitting pitching, and they kept him. They decided we're going to keep him. That started a string of 7 straight seasons for the Browns that he played center field, and he hit over 300. They had 3 outfielders for the Browns, all 3 of them for 7 seasons hit over 300. And they still didn't win the World Series. They just couldn't get over the hump, because at that time there was a team out on the East Coast called the Boston Red Sox that had a young man that was coming up that was Babe Ruth. So there were some good ball players on the East Coast, and they just couldn't get over the hump, even though they had some good hitting. Now, some people will say, well, how did he get the nickname Baby Doll? Well, he was William Jacobson, and that's what he went by. He went by William Jacobson, but he got a nickname called Baby Doll. And that seems kind of odd for a baseball player to have Baby Doll as a... Well, he was in Chattanooga, and he was batting, and there was at that time, in 19 teens, there was a popular song called Look at My Baby Doll. And the orchestra that they had there, they didn't have organs, they had an actual orchestra that would play. They played that song as he was coming up to bat. And at bat, he hit a triple, and then he scored. And when he came across the score, some lady behind home plate stood up and yelled, "Look at my baby doll!" And the newspapers picked it up and ran with it. And it stuck with him for his entire career. And if you look online today and you start looking for memorabilia, you can see that he signed, all his autographs were William Baby Doll Jacobson. And he was the hitter. He was a big hitter, and that was in an era, they called it the dead ball era, because there wasn't a lot of home runs. They played base-to-base baseball. Singles was better than a home run because they wanted more. But then as time went on, the home run came on, thanks to Babe Ruth, of course. But he played for 7 seasons for the Browns, and then the Browns decided to break the team up. And they wanted to go younger. So they ended up trading him to what was called the Philadelphia Athletics. Well, he never played for them because the Athletics did like that. You see it a lot in basketball today, where they trade and then they trade him again. Well, that's what the Athletics did. They traded for him. They needed more pitching, so they traded him. Even before the season started, they traded him over to Boston. And then he played a couple seasons for Boston, did all right, but started struggling. Now he's in his 30s, and he's starting to struggle with the batting and so on. So the Boston had him for a year, hit 290, so he did all right.
Pretty good.
And they traded him to Cleveland. Well, he didn't do so well in Cleveland, played a couple games, and they cut him. So, as a lot of players did, he wasn't ready to give up baseball. He went back to the minor leagues. So, he didn't get a championship at the major leagues, but he got 2 championships in the minor leagues, both in the 3I League, one with Rock Island and then now with Quincy. That was his last season of professional baseball. He retired, came back and bought a farm in Henry County, just between Geneseo and Orion. He bought a farm and then became a farmer. And farmed. He didn't give up baseball entirely. He played some semi-pro on the local diamonds. And then when he retired from farming, he still stayed in the area. That was the unique thing about a lot of these ball players. And when we look at a couple other of the Henry County men that went on to play ball, they always came back to Henry County. And he did. He came back to Henry County and played locally, played with some of the semi-pro teams. We'll talk later when we talk about another gentleman, he came back and played ball on an all-star team as a fundraiser. He just won the MVP. This was before he was with the Browns, but he still came back and Geneseo and Henry County was his area. He loved it so much that he would come back every season, even when he had his family. His family, he was living in Moline at that time, but he was still in this area doing things with his family and Henry County.
You know, and one thing that you mentioned, and it seems like a lot of players from that time, they had longer careers, even if their Major League Baseball career may have been rather short. They were up and down in the minors, and then they would go back to the minors and play after their Major League career was over. That's not the case now.
No, they get sent back down. They might stick around for a year thinking they might come right back up, but once they start to track down the minor league chain, going AAA, AA, so on, they step away.
Yeah.
And, you might see a guy, if you go over to Davenport and watch the team play, you might see a guy on a rehab start. They send him down to the lower levels. So, he had an injury, whatever, had Tommy John surgery in the pitcher. They start him out back then. But you don't see him. You don't see Derek Jeter coming back down and playing in their minor league teams.
Right.
Once they're done, they retire or they step away from the game. And I think it's because of the money.
The money, but at this time, they played for the love of the game.
Yes, they did. And they knew where they started from, too.
Mm-hmm.
They came back and supported the area and the history of their teams. Because, like I said, the all-star team he played for was called the All-Stars of Past Islanders. And they played the current Islanders in this fundraiser game. So it's just kind of unique that they would come back and play and support their players.
It absolutely is. And who knew that we had a player from right here in this area who made it to Major League Baseball, who played behind the one of the greats, Ty Cobb in Detroit, and that he was able to come back and then live out the rest of his life here.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about more of those in the upcoming shows as well. And Geneseo, Steve and I want to thank you for watching, and we're going to be talking about our next show is going to be one of those guys from Bishop Hill.
Bishop Hill, yes.
So Geneseo, thank you for watching, and we'll see you back here for more of Hidden Histories.